Wake up.
Okay, and on that note, we are live. It is Thursday, February 22nd. It's Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs. And we are going to pivot a little bit and just walk through some bills that I would say mostly interest the committee. Constituents reached out or the sponsor has reached out, but this one has definitely caught my attention, and Chair Coffey on the House side was really hoping we get to it, since it's gone to various places because it's kind of falls through a lot of our jurisdictions. So S271, and we have our lead sponsor, the chair.
Yeah, absolutely. So for the record, Senator Tanya Vinkowski from the Chittenden Central District. I am going to tell you a little bit about why I sponsored this bill. I'm going to leave it to Legislative Council to walk through all the details. But in 2020, I bought an electric vehicle. And when I bought my electric vehicle, I discovered I bought it used, so I wasn't eligible for the tax credit. And then I discovered I wasn't eligible for a free level 2 charger because I didn't own my home. And then I discovered that I wasn't eligible for the rate cuts because I didn't have a level 2 charger. And so because I'm a renter, I was not eligible for any of the incentives to purchasing an EV. And as I talked to members of my community who lived in multi-unit dwellings, they can't even charge their cars. I do have a garage and can plug my car in, but it takes 16 hours to charge it. And because it's just getting plugged into the wall. And what I discovered in our multi-unit dwellings, and we're trying to do more and more of that to do infill building, is that those renters had no ability to charge an EV.
Yeah.
And so we've cut out a whole swath of Vermonters being able to purchase EVs, being able to use EVs. And so that is why I sponsored this bill, a bill that would make it so that those multi-unit dwellings have to have some amount of charging. It does not mean that they have to pay for the electricity, but that they do have to provide that. And I think if we're really going to get serious about getting EVs out onto the road, we have to include everyone.
Exactly.
Oh,
Yeah.
good point.
Yeah.
That's a harsh way to learn that.
Yes, it is. It was
Yeah.
definitely a really harsh learning experience.
I think Efficiency Vermont says something like, you have to see EV infrastructure for 2 years before you trust it enough to consider purchasing one of your own. So there's huge parts of the population that never see it, but never feel like they could know what it's even like. I mean, 16 hours, that's a long time. So you made the leap and then realized that
sometimes I just can't go places
Yeah.
because my car isn't charged.
pioneer.
Yeah.
Also, you're never gonna see it if it's not available in your housing area.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
And
it's kind of this awful
It's a
catch
vicious
22.
cycle we're in. So thank you for the spill.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know at least in my district, we have a really high percentage of renters. And so I know that this would really help people in my district
Yeah.
to be able to buy EVs and actually be eligible for some of the incentives that are out there to make that easier for people.
Yeah.
So what do you see living in this community? What do you see as sort of some of the barriers we may have to address in it? I mean, additional land, because EV chargers take away other parking places. Other than that, what do you see as sort of some of the infrastructure challenges we may have to overcome?
I mean, I certainly think that there the other pieces that EV chargers are expensive.
Yeah.
I certainly see in a couple of places within my community, like the grocery store near me has some EV parking spaces, and where they put them so it doesn't take away parking spaces is in the sort of like green space between the parking spaces.
Right.
So they've situated them in a space where there's a curb they can put them up on. I certainly think that it's important for us to be thinking about EV charging and disability access. A lot of times EV chargers, like your State House, are really far away from the entrance to the building. So I definitely think there are things that we have to think about and help our developers navigate, but I don't think they're insurmountable.
No, we can definitely make it work, and I look forward to seeing the details. I have a hybrid, and the reason I got a hybrid instead of the all EV was because I didn't trust the charging. And it's just not available enough. So this is good. Thank you for bringing it up.
Is this on new construction or all rental units? Because all rental units are the same. Some are old housing that doesn't have a driveway.
Yeah, we're
Yeah.
printing the bill too. I don't know how much detail you want to go on. I'm curious about the same things, right? But Green Mountain Power is offering on-bill financing for Tesla Power Walls to homeowners. So, we would just hope to make it easier and almost like push it on landlords, you know, to say like, you have to.
Yeah, it's expensive.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
the initial infrastructure is expensive and not all are we picking
Right.
up?
Right.
Somebody to
I
put
will
an
say
accessory dwelling unit in their,
just-
and
Yeah,
in their house, and now they've gotta do.
we just put in the Tesla Powerwall at our house, and it's like, it's almost a negligible cost, because it goes on your bill for 10 years. So,
You mean, each month it's amortized.
For those utilities that offer that service.
right, but they
And
could
many
offer it.
Utilities
So they
do not. For example, Swanton Electric does
Right,
not offer that,
right.
and it's not available. So that's my question is, in terms of your bill, does it provide any information as to how this will be paid for?
I'm trying to remember all of the fine details of the bill. and finally found it.
You have judiciary brain right now.
Very much in judiciary
Yeah.
space.
Yeah.
I don't think DOC is gonna pay for it.
So we won't go too deep into the
Yeah.
details. I think this is a really important concept, and it's one that between us and natural resources, we've been trying to get at for a long time, that if we leave a huge part of the population behind, you know, for solar panels and EVs, et cetera, it's, you know, we're just not meeting our goals. We're missing people who really need the most help to lower their bill. So I'm glad you brought
But
it.
at the same time,
Yes.
there's a balance issue here. We're trying to build houses of which we are desperately short. Every time we add a new requirement and a new cost to the building or the renovation of houses, we make it less likely to get the housing that we need. And so it's, for us achieving that balance, it's gotta be critically important.
It is a good time to look at this because of the Inflation Reduction Act, you know,
I was
because
gonna say.
the federal government
support.
would like to fund this transition, and certainly some of our smaller power companies are just not gonna be able to be part of the ease of the transition, but our biggest power companies are really only giving benefits to homeowners who, in my mind, just don't need the financial support as much as the landlord who says, I wanna be responsible, but I need to piece out this payment.
And I would really hope that we would work to partner with our larger utilities and to draw down as much federal funding to fund this as we can. I know that the Inflation Reduction Act has huge amounts of money for states to draw down for this type of infrastructure building, so I would hope to work as much as we can to take as much federal money off the table as we can.
Right.
There is no state money this year.
Private, I mean, because many of these rental units are of course private. So I assume that there's also infrastructure money somewhere for private developers to add this. At the moment, I'm sure it is, because there are private individuals, so I'm assuming that.
Well, the state did a pilot a couple of years ago for rental, charging. And so there have been,
There was a
yeah,
pilot
there was a pilot program, about this, and
but for rental housing.
for rental.
I
to
thought I remember
install
something like that.
EVs.
Yeah.
And it gets very complicated, so
Yes.
devil's in the details, right?
Yeah.
Because it changes your parking configuration, you gotta figure out who parks where.
Right.
But
Even
there was
yeah.
funding. and
Even
so
the pilot for low income homeowners couldn't use all the money because you do have to have a certain amount of infrastructure in
Right,
your home, and a
Right.
low income homeowner often, that's hard to find that nexus of somebody who has the infrastructure and particularly struggle to solve the low income.
but something we also should look at, I think, is when we're creating new housing, put in not the entire infrastructure, but at least the conduit, which is really inexpensive.
Yeah.
Just think ahead so that we can easily add the connections later.
Right.
I also know some of the charging space, just in terms of like parking configurations that I have seen, they actually hang on the wall. So that also would,
Yeah.
so I think there's definitely different mechanisms that
Right.
can be implemented that shouldn't be too cumbersome.
Right.
And thinking about new construction particularly, you know, making, to your point, making sure that it is as sustainable as possible, it's going to save money over time.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure all of you know, like, I think that sometimes that upfront investment ultimately ends up saving money.
Exactly. Yeah, and you know, we know that whether or not we agree with it from a philosophical perspective, there's a lot of pressure to look at 2035 to make a huge transition away from fossil fuel vehicles. And we just won't be ready to even have that conversation if we don't start the village now.
And I don't wanna see us there, you know, I know that a lot of car companies are committed to not making fossil fuel cars, beyond a certain date, and I don't wanna see our most vulnerable Vermonters, our low and moderate income Vermonters who can't afford to buy, now unable to drive.
Right, and with fuel prices going up, yes, control was.
So obviously, we need to work with transportation on this because we don't want to reinvent the wheel. Transportation already knows pretty much all. I mean, our loss is that Anthea has left.
Yes,
And so
I
we
said
don't
this
have that
thing,
deep.
I said the same thing to Chair Coffee, just like help us with the transportation side of this, because
well, and
there's a reason it's come to our committee, because it is more landlord tenant than
it's
transportation.
another thing that it had to be discussed in our landlord tenant task force.
Oh, yeah, when we have Angela Zakowski, we could also.
Yeah,
mention.
So that's another thing to discuss, but I think this is great, but I think we need to touch base with what has already happened.
Yes.
What is in the pipeline and what they've already considered.
Right,
It's 'cause they-
I'm wondering,
And the things that are, well, just a little bit more.
well, yeah, I want you to be our liaison to transportation.
Oh, I'd be happy to.
Okay.
But, the pilot was by ACCD, so that's one, so they're
Yeah.
getting the chargers. But then there's also how people pay, you know, the single family ones, you just pay on your bill.
Right.
But then Tesla is supposed to be making their chargers available to
Yes.
other models, which would help
They've
tremendously.
become the national standard.
But that's the
Yeah.
federal, I mean,
Right,
the federal government is trying to force them to do that essentially. 'cause
Oh,
they don't
I
want
thought
to
it
do
was a
that.
done deal.
No,
Okay,
no.
I thought they were now agreed upon. Tesla chargers are the chargers that will be
Well,
everywhere.
well, the standard is, I mean,
Yeah.
the connection is,
Yeah.
but allowing non-Tesla cars to use it because you need to have a Tesla account.
Yeah, oh, I thought.
It gets pretty complicated,
Yeah.
yeah.
And Tesla's, there's still two charging standards. There's the J1772 plug and an NACS plug, which is Tesla. Only 12 car manufacturers are moving their new models over to Tesla.
Interesting.
Other cars will need to get an adapter.
Right, but there is an
To marry.
adapter. so
Yeah,
it's
you can
better
get
than
an
it was,
adapter
yeah.
cheaply, but yeah, it's not like a mandated, every car in the US is gonna sell a Tesla with a Tesla plug yet.
Uh-huh.
That's not settled, so.
I know the
that's
regional
important to keep
director
in
for
mind.
Tesla. We might want to have Tesla in.
Yes, that would be great.
Yeah.
This is also based after, language that is either in process or passed in California, so
Yeah.
it is not without precedent to have
Right,
legislation like this.
right.
Yeah, and I think our Efficiency Vermont folks worked with California on this, especially mapping out where the low income areas are that should have the infrastructure. I asked Magali to see if Senator Westman's available because he feels strongly about proposing a revenue source from electric vehicles to fund electric vehicle charging infrastructure, so I'm just gonna see if.
Yeah.
We should let you go back to judiciary.
Thank you.
If you
This
like.
is great.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'd love to spend all day with you, but
Right.
we are doing some important stuff in
You know,
judiciary.
you get to jump around a lot.
Thank you for having
Thank
me
you, Senator.
and for considering this.
Oh, definitely.
Damien, and I think we'll have, Tony might do copies of the bills, but we'll have those soon. Thank you.
Morning.
Morning.
Fun to come in here on something besides workers' comp.
I was
You-
gonna say, how
I
did
know.
this end up in your bucket?
Anthea's gone and Donna.
Yeah, so there's this is more rental housing and
Right.
condos than
Okay.
it is electric vehicles, but I should probably tell all of you that I'm planning to move to the transportation portfolio next year.
I thought you were moving
Oh.
from the state, so.
No. So
Okay, we will
I'm
miss you.
planning to move to that portfolio
Okay.
anyway, but for now Donna's gonna be your ledge counsel there. And,
Donna Russo stuff.
yeah, but I'm covering this bill.
And you
Rest
buy
of
a
the-
waiver for now.
Yeah, I'm still my existing portfolio through the end of the session.
Okay, well, that is sad, but I thought,
So-
I mean, we're losing
Yeah.
people, so I thought you were like leaving for months.
But no, I'm not leaving. But after 10 years of
Yeah, no
workers'
time
comp
to
and
shake it
UI, I
up.
think I need to
You're so good.
get a change of subject
Okay.
matter.
Okay,
And-
it's your choice.
And we might add, given all the excitement of the technical corrections bill where you had, we get to see all the titles you get to make it. Exciting.
I've given everything I can.
That's big news.
Money.
That's big news.
It's technical.
We'll celebrate, you don't have to get to this.
But yeah, so there is a nexus there for me with this bill.
Yeah.
So that I volunteered to grab this one.
Yeah,
Um,
That's great.
so this bill, there are two sections. The first section is gonna deal with rental housing. The second section is gonna deal with condominiums and other
yes.
developments. So the things you want to just keep in mind, some terminology, since we don't deal with electric vehicles a lot in here.
Yeah.
Anywhere you see EVSE, that is electric vehicle supply equipment, it's a fancy word for charger.
We're ready to
Anytime,
be on transportation now.
yeah, you are, that's it, you got everything you need.
That's the code.
So you're also gonna see EVSE time of use or TOU meters. That is the meter that the electric company installs if the electric company has benefits for charging at off-peak times. So if you can get a lower rate charging your car, say between midnight and 10 a.m.
Yeah.
They'll install the time of use meter and you can even program those so that it starts charging your car when the rates go down. And it helps them balance out their the grid.
Yeah.
So yes,
I think as you move into this portfolio, I would be just curious to know how many people are actually taking advantage of that. I mean, Vermonters are so generally thrifty that I would think many, particularly if you have it at your home, that.
that might be a better question for Rob or for
Yeah,
Green Mountain
okay.
Power or something
Yeah,
like
I
that.
have GMP on the list.
Yeah, GMP does have a program, and so they may be able to tell you how
Yeah,
many of their
be
customers take
interesting.
advantage of it.
Company.
Other things to keep in mind here, we're gonna talk a little bit more about infrastructure later. It's important to keep in mind that it's not just the conduit and the plug. It may be a panel upgrade.
Yes.
A lot of older Vermont houses have, and I'm putting on my code attorney hat here.
Yeah.
A lot of older Vermont houses have like 100 amp electric panel. You can't add a 40 or 50 amp plug to that and expect the panel to handle the capacity,
Right.
especially when we're electrifying water heating,
Yeah.
heat pumps and other things. So that's another potential cost with this, just to keep in mind. And it's important to say at the outset, this bill does not pay those costs.
Okay,
This bill gives people the right to request it and pay for it themselves. So it does not create the incentive programs that you may want to combine with this, and it doesn't, for example, put a mandate on a smaller electric company to start providing these incentives. That's still up to the electric company. Same thing for the landlords. If the landlords want to chip in part of the cost, that's up to them.
right. So the tenant is essentially saying, I have the right to this infrastructure and I will, pay for it. They can't force some kind of agreement with the landlord to either pay part of the cost or to pay them back for the infrastructure when they leave.
Right.
They are taking on that.
Right, and the right comes with some caveats. It's based on law in Colorado and California. So Colorado and California are two of the states that have the broadest implementation of this.
Yeah,
There are a couple other states, and I left my list back in my desk. But there are a couple other states that have put in a version of this, just trimmed down from what you see that applies, for example, only to rental housing or only to condos, something
But on
like that.
rental, there's a provision in the bill in which the lessor pays for it, but there has to be a lease of a certain length of time. Because it's potentially amortized, is that correct?
I don't recall that section, but let's go through the bill and then
Okay, yeah.
we'll talk about each provision.
yeah.
So the first thing
And
is,
I think are we telling Senator Birch to wait 15 minutes? Okay,
yeah,
so we have extra time.
Okay.
Senator Birch is not gonna take 30 minutes to talk about cash. So.
okay.
Maybe you have to sell it.
So the
Alright,
first
okay.
piece of this is the rental agreements piece only applies to agreements that take effect on or after January 1 of next year. So it's perspective.
So it begins next year.
Yep, and then it requires the landlord to approve a written request of a tenant to install a charger at a parking space allotted for the tenant. And complies, provided that the request complies with the landlord's procedural approval process for modifications to the property. For a lot of landlords, there may not be a process like this. For some of the bigger property management companies, there may be. So this is language taken from Colorado. I would recommend, given our language, changing the term lessor to landlord, so it's consistent with the rest of the landlord tenant
Okay.
statute.
Okay.
So there are a few
Lessor to
things,
landlord,
yeah, there are a few things in here where
right,
we may want to update the language.
Yeah.
So who doesn't this apply to? It doesn't apply to a property where charging equipment already exists in a ratio that's at least 10% of the designated parking spaces. Where parking is not provided as part of the lease agreement, so if you don't have allocated parking. Or where there are fewer than 5 parking spaces, so this is a
Okay.
lot of small rentals that are
Yeah,
not covered by this.
We were just allowing double wide tandem parking. and
Right.
I was
Oh, yeah.
trying to visualize.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fair. Good point.
Right, so for a lot of your rentals where, say, you were talking about accessory dwelling units a minute
Yeah.
ago, there may only be one spot.
Right.
The requirement doesn't apply.
Yeah,
The landlord still could, but they're not under the mandate to approve,
right.
provided they get the written request.
I think this really captures what we'd be hoping to capture, new construction of large housing projects covered under our other bill. Yeah,
So other things this doesn't do is it doesn't obligate the landlord to provide an additional parking space for the tenant. And it does allow the landlord, if providing this parking space with charging has the effect of giving the tenant a reserved parking space, the landlord can charge the tenant for the reserved parking space. And then it does require the charging equipment and any meters to comply with all federal, state, and local laws, zoning requirements, etc. And then the tenant has to agree as part of the request to modify the equipment, they have to be willing to enter into a written agreement that includes the following. So in other words, the landlord can require that the tenant comply with the landlord's requirements for the installation, use, maintenance, and removal of the charging equipment and or the meter, as well as the maintenance of the infrastructure for it. That the tenant provide upfront cost and work summary for the installation, and that the tenant pay the landlord all costs associated with the installation of the charging equipment and the meter. So this is recognizing that the landlord is the owner of the property. So it's basically requiring reimbursement of the landlord if the landlord's going to be the landowner who authorizes the work for the
okay.
power company or the electrician. And then this gets to Senator Brock's question of allowing the landlord to basically charge it back.
Question, if we are, like, I don't know if that would be fully a transportation question, but if we are proposing. If we're seeing large new development come in, let's just say of the size of 25 units or more. Nowhere in statute now does it say you should have charging capability for 10% of your parking spaces.
Not that I'm aware of. So this is something that could go into, it could come in a variety of contexts.
Yeah.
For example, it could be a building code change
Right,
requiring new construction of residential housing. It could be tied as a condition of grant funding from some of the state subsidies
Right.
for housing
Right.
construction. there are a variety of ways you can do it, and depending on how you do it is gonna affect which committee it ends up in.
Okay,
As primary jurisdiction.
but we could amend this and that might mean it goes to another committee.
Right, especially, I mean, certainly if you put money in here, it's definitely gonna have to make a stop.
Right.
And then it may cross over into particularly transportation's jurisdiction.
Yes.
And possibly elsewhere, depending on what you're
The
required.
net effect, if I'm reading this correctly, is that if there is a successive tenant, in other words, the lease of the tenant who has installed the parts, the landlord has a right to continue to collect whatever costs over and above what the original tenant has paid from the successive tenant. And presumably, in both cases, it raises the rent.
Right, or it would have the effect of raising the rent.
But they're not
so-
paying
Yeah.
gas, they're not paying for gas outside of the.
Well, presumably, but what if the tenant who rents it doesn't have an electric vehicle?
So,
It limits then the desirability of what's built to someone who has an electric vehicle because they would be paying for something they couldn't use.
well, so one of the things to keep in mind is when you've got your level 2 chargers at home, you have two options. One is hardwired, where it's wired into the electrical system directly. The other is plug-in version. So in other words, you can order a level 2 charger that plugs straight into a 40 amp or 50 amp outlet in the wall, similar to your electric stove. And then the tenant can literally, they could buy that and take that with them at the end of the lease, just leaving a 40 amp outlet on the wall. But again, there can be requirements to maintain that infrastructure, but that's
There's nothing
relatively
here
low
that-
cost.
That deals with that one way or the other. It's a decision of the tenant and the landlord.
Yes,
Presumably the tenant.
this bill doesn't mandate that.
But there are certain costs that would still remain with the building, for example, the change in electrical service required.
Right, and so the landlord
And the
can,
infrastructure put in to be able to support the charger, whether it's removable or not.
so the landlord, what subdivision 3 basically says here is that the landlord can require the tenant to pay all of the costs associated with the installation, so the upfront costs are paid by the tenant that wants it installed. And then the ongoing costs could be passed on to the future tenants by the landlord.
Where is it?
So it's not well written. In terms, no,
Yeah, yeah.
not shorting Anthea, this was taken from the Colorado law.
Got it.
So it's using their verbiage, but so the agreement can include
Sorry,
These
where
It's
are
on
we?
page 3, so at the bottom.
And section 3.
bottom of page 3, line 20.
Okay.
The written agreement can include the obligation of the tenant to pay the lessor all costs associated with the lessor's installation of the charging equipment and the meter. And related infrastructure prior to any modification or improvement being made on this property. So in other words,
I think.
give me the
Yeah.
upfront costs, here's the quote. I need you to pay this upfront, then we'll authorize the work and this will get
Right.
installed so that I, the landlord, am not on the hook for $3,000 of work. And you're saying, oh, I'm sorry, I don't have the money.
Right. The missing puzzle
Your
piece.
electric box, that's gonna be pretty.
Right, if you're upgrading your electrical service, that could be significantly more.
We've got a lot of old buildings out there that still have not.
Right.
I know, and we can talk more about that, but the
Yeah.
tenant would pay that, so the landlord
Yes.
would actually get an improvement to their building paid
Exactly.
for
Right.
by
I
the
think it's
tenant, the
really
way this is written.
Promise to pay for it.
No, well, the way I'm
No.
reading this, it says that pay all
It doesn't
costs.
happen.
Yeah.
This is one of the things where I think you can clarify this language.
Right.
Because your
I
intent
think
in the
we-
language,
So-
if I read it correctly, was to add all those costs together, have them be amortized into the tenant's rent.
I think what you can do is you can clarify that the landlord can. So the way I read this is this allows the landlord to require the tenant to enter into a written agreement that obligates the tenant to pay the landlord all costs associated with the installation prior to any modification or improvement being made to the leased property. So that's an upfront payment
Mhm.
rather than amortized.
Okay.
I think if you want to clarify that, you can say that more clearly. This was this was taken from another state's law and just kind of put into our formula. So,
So I think it could be fairly simple, that is, it, to go to your point about that, if a tenant moves. The landlord could buy the tenant out and or reimburse them for that initial investment.
So-
And then they would own that space.
So-
Let me just finish my thought, which is, and then the landlord owns it, and then it can be put into the lease, the rent, you know,
What if the
whoever's the
landlord
next
doesn't
renter.
wanna own it, do we
Yeah.
make it mandatory? Is that what the intent
I think
is?
before we get too worked up about it, the missing puzzle piece here for me is that there are organizations that want to fund this infrastructure. And this kind of agreement could help make sure the nexus is there, that they're not taking on too much risk to fund the infrastructure, that renters are left out of this because there's no clear agreement for someone to draft on their payment for this infrastructure. And this helps create that potential opening. What I don't want to ask too much of Damien is, I have a big list of witnesses like Energy Investment Corporation and others who could tell us, yes, this could help us fund that infrastructure while we have the money in a way that works for landlords and tenants. So I just don't want us to,
Could we also hear from landlords?
I have
We have-
ELA on
we
my
have
list.
Angela.
Yeah, I have a huge list that I think we could get through in an hour or two. But I think we need to hear from the people trying to do this, what they need statutorily.
And what's
Yeah.
already done,
so
I'm sure lots of landlords have already addressed this.
being conscious of your time here, let me see if I can get through the rest of this.
Yes.
The key takeaways here in 3 and 4 are the landlord can require upfront payment for the cost of the improvement.
Right.
And then the landlord can, and I think this goes back to that question you raised earlier. The landlord can require that the tenant pay as part of the rent, the costs associated with the charging, which could include increased electrical costs, et cetera, as well as maintenance. The landlord can, the law would also require the tenant to obtain personal liability coverage on the installation, unless the installation uses a charging equipment that's been certified by nationally recognized testing laboratories. So this is like your UL certified or ETL listed, or your UL listed or ETL listed stamp on there. So it's been tested by one of those groups. And then the work is performed by a licensed electrician and the electrical distribution utility if there's a time of use meter being added. So the good news is already, except for single family owner occupied homes and duplexes, you're required to have a licensed electrician. So for most of the units that are covered by this, you're already required to have a licensed electrician. What you're going to run into is the duplexes and the ADUs, where the tenant may want to hire a licensed electrician to do the work, so they don't have to maintain insurance or pay the extra money to have a licensed electrician do the work. And then there is a penalty in here. So if a landlord violates the section, they're liable for actual damages and a civil penalty of up to $1,000, as well as reasonable attorney's fees. Couple of things to note is the attorney's fees are only for the prevailing plaintiff, so not the prevailing party. And it also doesn't provide for costs. Typically we provide for attorney's fees and costs. Those are policy questions. The whole penalty is policy question.
Right.
So that's the landlord tenant piece. Section 2.
Could I just,
Yep.
again, understanding, in the rental agreement, the lessor shall approve a written request to install.
Yeah, so there is a mandate to approve, provided
Yeah.
But they can require the tenant to agree to those conditions, including payment of the cost.
But in terms of installing and getting installation done, is it the tenant's responsibility to get it done, or is it the landlord's responsibility to get it done after the request, provided the tenant agrees to pay, the terms? Who's responsible?
The bill is silent on that, but the way it's written, seems to acknowledge that the landlord would be responsible to arrange for the work in the same way a landlord would call a plumber to fix the plumbing. But that is something where you may want to allow them to agree to do
I've seen
otherwise.
situations in which the person makes the request. Under this, the landlord is obligated to get it done. The landlord can't find an electrician, as many of us can't. And it doesn't get done. The tenant wants to move in. Who's responsible? And what are the liabilities associated for either party at that point?
I think that's a good discussion to have, particularly with the landlords association, particularly also with that violation language, you may want to include that, language protecting the landlord, for example, who can only get an electrician in 6 months from that date,
Right.
due to back orders of materials or
And then, of course,
whatever
the
it is.
next issue
Yeah.
arises if the tenant has already moved in with the expectation it's going to be done, it isn't done, who's liable at that point?
And these are,
Then we
yeah,
work
Right,
that,
he
yeah.
needs to walk away because he or she has no place to charge his or her vehicle.
I don't think anyone disagrees that we need to build a contingency, I just want to get through
Well, I
the.
would understand it.
Yeah, yeah.
when I get to the point.
right, and so
We're
this-
not voting it out by any means, we're,
So
you
this also gets into more of the heart of what this committee frequently works on, which is the lease agreement between the
Right.
landlord and the tenant. And one of those things is the landlord going to be in breach of the agreement if they've included this as a term of the agreement? And I think that's a good question for example, Angela Zykowski, about how hard it would be to structure these agreements, et cetera. And you likely want to also hear from others who have helped install these at
yeah,
rental locations. They can speak to this more than I can.
right,
But you may want to write protections in there based on your
exactly.
testimony.
Yeah.
So, this brings us to common interest communities, generally condominiums. But there can be other common interest communities out there.
So like an
Um,
HOA, that's the word,
Exactly.
okay,
Yep. So a common interest community is, it's basically where, the owners have agreed to be responsible for the common areas together. And then they each own their property there. So the things in common are maintained. Cooperatives can be part of a common interest community, but they are not in and of themselves a common interest community, if that makes any sense. So, which is an interesting carve out, and David Hall could probably tell you why,
Aw.
unfortunately. So all section 2 does is it adds a cross reference to the new law, so that's a simple one. Section 3 is the new law. It tracks to some extent with the landlord tenant, but there are some key changes. There are definitions, for example, for the charging equipment owner means the unit owner who installs the charging equipment and their successors. Plug-in electric vehicle. This includes both plug-in hybrids and battery electrical vehicles. Battery electrical vehicles, gosh, it is.
you
Tongue
gotta,
twisters
you gotta
here.
learn this stuff.
I'm gonna have to get better.
Transportation.
BEVs and PHEVs, there we go.
My God, now you're sounding like healthcare.
Yeah. And then reasonable restrictions, this is a key definition for understanding the whole section. It's a restriction that does not significantly increase the cost of the charging equipment or the time of use meter, or significantly decrease the efficiency or performance of the charging equipment or the time of use meter. So, and then we get into the protected uses. So in B1, what this basically says is that a common interest community must permit and cannot unreasonably restrict unit owners from installing charging equipment. That's the gist of those 10 lines of text there. And that would be installation in the unit owner's designated parking space, or in their, if they have an exclusive use or limited common element, that's designated for them. Likewise, so for example, if you have a parking space in a little yard area, you could put your charger on a post there or something like that.
Yes, because for many of these, they're not gonna be plugged into the house itself or the building itself, they're gonna have to be standalones.
Yeah.
Okay, but
And-
I'm thinking of the senior living facility that I did. It's half apartments and it's independent living and they have cars. And across the driveways to the building, there's some covered areas that have parking spaces in them. So if one of those people decided they wanted to put in plug charger, they would be liable for running the electricity out the building, making any changes that the building needed, like excess capacity ability. Okay, that would be very
Yeah.
expensive.
Yeah, they may, I mean, there are other ways to do it too. There's the possibility of installing a second panel and meter out at the parking location rather than trenching the line. Because generally, the longer your line, as the line gets longer, you have electricity losses. So
Yeah.
sometimes you want to just be closer to the source rather than something it.
I hadn't appreciated.
Right, so for example, this is happen if, for example, you have, your drop is at your house and you're charging out at the barn. And then you want to run a line, you have to run a much thicker conduit to run the electrical wires and carry a lot more current down that line because of your losses.
So we'll make time for this,
So-
to explain.
Yeah, there's a lot of nuances to this, but this anticipates that you may just be paying for the cost of a box with a drop and meter, et cetera. But it's on the unit owner.
Yeah, it's
So-
cost prohibitive.
Because
It's cost prohibitive.
I could see condominium owners being concerned about people digging trenches under. In some of the cases, it's a roadway.
Right.
Yes, and you're right, repaving, it's gonna be, there's a lot.
Well, the city would have to repave it and it would be, you'd have to pay them, and it's expensive.
Right.
Yeah.
So the B2 here basically says reasonable restrictions, so things that don't hurt the efficiency or the effectiveness of the charging are okay, but the state is encouraging the removal of obstacles to the use of plug-in electric vehicles, including allowing people to charge at their residence. Just like with the rental provisions. Yeah.
1 second, when we have a statement like that, it is the policy of the state to promote, encourage, and remove obstacles. Does that have any suggestion relative to the approval process under our various laws that require approvals and permits to do things?
So the next subsection goes on to say that it must comply with all federal, state, and local laws, including applicable zoning and land use requirements. So the way I would read this is that sentence is doesn't actually create any particular binding restrictions or limitations on the application of land use law. It's more of, this is our goal is to promote this use. But you have to comply with all existing requirements. So I see this as more as,
Objective in terms of when permits are granted.
yeah, this language, I don't think it adds any teeth to the law in one way or the other. And I don't think it changes the effect of the law. I think you could do the law without that sentence. Or put that into an intent statement at the beginning, saying that it is the intent to promote the use of plug-in electric vehicles. And for that reason, we're providing additional rights for people to install them or protecting the right of people
It's
to
not a
install them.
suggestion, if you will, to planning and zoning boards that this is state policy that they should follow.
No, it's actually, it's, the subdivision is referencing reasonable restrictions that, for example, the condominium association might impose. So it's basically, I think it's intended to encourage the condominium associations to make it easier for people. But it might be, again, this could be something where you want to say it a little more clearly.
Yeah, if the condominium association didn't have the electric capacity and one person wanted to do that, but it would require that the electric be upgraded and that would be costs put on to all members of the condo association. How I believe that works.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get into a lot of detail, but I think it's one purpose and one result could be to have the condominium association look at it as a whole, because they're going to want multiple.
Yes.
Multiple folks who live there are going to want EVs at some point, so they could just look at it as a whole
So-
and
I
plan for it.
wanna maybe take 3 more minutes, because like,
Okay.
it sounds
Yeah.
like we're gonna go really.
So,
Yeah.
So,
I think the
But
important
it's a
thing
big
to,
investment, I mean, it will be a common investment in a condo.
Right, exactly,
association,
and then we haven't even talked about solar.
so,
2 minutes.
Yeah.
okay, again,
Because you're right, there's. solar.
if I can refocus you, this is talking about when
That's a
the
chat.
unit owner says, I wanna have a charger because I have a
Yeah.
electric vehicle or I'm acquiring one. Not when the condo association says, we have this parking lot here that's common for all of our unit owners. And we're going to install 4 charging stations there that are shared in common.
Right.
So this is focused more on when the unit owner says, I would like to install charging equipment either at the space in front of my unit or at the sheltered parking I have across the way, or whatever it is. Whatever the situation is, one of their parking spaces or in their limited common elements. So that's so what this goes on to say in subdivision 4 is not to treat this the same as any other application by a unit owner to make an architectural modification to the common interest community. And you can't unreasonably or intentionally avoid or delay the review of the application. So you can't just table it indefinitely. And then you have to approve or deny it in writing, and it does set, and this is an important thing to keep in mind here, it sets a deemed approved if not approved or denied within 60 days provision. That's
We had
something-
this debate.
Right, so that's something for discussion.
Yes.
And where is that?
That's at the bottom of on page 8 here,
Line
line
14.
14 to 17.
Oh, yes.
So, the subdivision 5 is a special provision for installation in the common elements or limited common elements. So if you're going to install in common elements, everyone shares in them, limited common elements, less than everyone shares in them.
I think
You
we
have to
should
comply
pause
with like
for
the
Senator.
next.
I'm hoping everyone's okay if
Okay.
we pause for Senator Perchley.
EVs, we're doing it.
You're in the conference committee,
Yeah.
right?
No, we're done.
Oh, you're done. Well, congratulations.
No, we're not.
For the day.
They're not done.
Okay.
They
So
are not.
can we do the rest in 1 minute, Damien? Like, doesn't even,
Sure,
I think we're gonna come back to this, so I just,
Yeah.
like, zero detail, what else? is
zero detail, yeah.
No, we're not.
So if you go to page
Wait,
9, it's a list of things that, just like the agreement for rental housing, there's a list of things that the unit owner would have to agree to. And then at the bottom of page 9, the unit owner is responsible for costs of damages,
Okay.
and the maintenance, repairs, cost of use. And then they have to disclose it to future owners of their unit. And then going down to page 10, they have to maintain insurance.
Okay.
Unless they're using a charger that has a National Electrical Manufacturers Association or NEMA standard plug. So NEMA plugs your 3-prong plug, your 2-prong plug,
Yeah,
the plug for your washer, the
Okay.
plug for your stove, those are all NEMA plugs.
what Tanya's having to use and charge $16.
What is NEMA?
No, that's-
And-
No, so
Oh,
NEMA,
okay, then never mind.
Regular-
NEMA, National Electrical Manufacturers Association, they standardize the plugs for North America. So it's a standard North American plug
Okay.
rather than hardwired into your
Okay.
electrical system.
More
this
on
is-
plugs later.
Right, this is what I was talking about before, where you take the level 2 charger and you plug it into the wall rather than wiring it into the wall directly. Understood?
Highlights of the last.
And then the installation on common or limited common elements is only if they can't do it at their unit.
Okay,
And then the association can install its own chargers and then same penalties as before, and we're done.
yay, thank you, Damien. I'm glad you heard some of that, Senator Pritchett, because it's a. Representative Coffey actually asked us to take it up since it's mostly landlord tenant law, but clearly I've asked Senator Harrison to liaise with your committee.
Good.
On this one, but I do get the sense we're gonna take it up. We will go with Senator Pritchett and then come back to you, Rob, unless you have a time constraint. Okay, thank you for your patience. You're clearly listening to
My
our
boss is
conversation.
listening to you, so.
Thank you, Damien.
Thank you.
And we'll clearly have you back on this.
I will
And
see you guys
sound
later.
great in your future jurisdiction, so. Yeah.
Although we will miss you.
We'll have time to say that.
Senator Pritchett brought in as the institutional memory of
Yeah.
those statutes.
You just need the
Okay.
building code bills.
We're gonna switch our brains momentarily. Do we have this bill too? Yes. So we now are switching momentarily to S-175. And actually need to require retail businesses to accept cash.
Oh, I was thinking cash for charging, electric charging. That's another
Let's talk about that.
That's not a retail business
Yeah.
then, that would be
Thank you.
challenging. Senator Pritchett.
Thank you, Sharon. Thanks for having me in to talk about this bill. This is a bill that would basically allow or not allow businesses to make you pay with a credit card or not accept cash. So Senator Cummings and I have some constituents that have gone to local businesses wanting to pay cash. These are small dollar transactions, and the businesses said, we don't accept cash.
What?
Well,
Who doesn't
the
accept?
specific one was a transfer station. And I can see where there is some employee safety at
Oh,
night frequently. Go
Got
through
it,
any
got it, got
cold.
Are they considered a retail business?
I don't know.
That's, I have Rick as the drafter, so I think
We can ask
the big
that.
question is what's a retail business? And we might
Yeah.
have a few exemptions.
Right.
Senator Rob.
One of the things that I run across most frequently is refusal to accept size of bill. In other words, we won't accept 50s or 100s, for example. This doesn't address that, or? It doesn't, but when I looked at other states, that was addressed in some other states. And so there's. Dunkin' Donuts is a classic example. Yeah,
Is it?
give them $100 bill.
Now I would
$50
regret.
bill, they won't take.
Oh, because of, they're afraid of being robbed.
I don't know.
I think it's
But
their
I think
issue,
it might
that
be
was,
because
they don't
silver
have cash.
bills are and change are in short supply, and if you give
All of it.
somebody
Yeah.
who's not, especially at night where you don't wanna keep cash on
Right.
hand, you can deplete their change,
Right.
so they can't make change for any other.
They just have to carry a larger amount of money. If it's nothing
Yes.
else, you know, if you have change for 50, it isn't depleting your 1s and 2s and 5s, it's depleting your 20s. Yeah. What are you gonna do with a 20? Yes,
oh, I can think of lots of things.
I welcome the committee to, if they want to take it up, to talk about those kind of things.
Yes.
The exemptions, I only put the one exemption for things under $1,000, so you don't have to,
Right,
somebody wants to pay cash for their car, you
yeah,
don't have to accept it. And other states have a bunch of other exemptions. You
Yeah.
don't have to, like.
I had a dentist who used to say like, if you pay me cash. I don't
You
have
get
cash
cash.
for my dental procedure.
Yeah, they want you to get a discount.
Yeah, 'cause some businesses,
Well,
people
that's,
do
no, that's
like to
because
use
of the,
cash.
Yeah.
they save
yeah,
Cumberland Farms, that's a
3%.
direct,
Right,
you know,
Yeah.
percent.
yeah.
Debits cost
The-
businesses money.
It's very expensive to use charge cards.
Charge cards and
And-
debit cards.
Right,
We did some work here, when Welch was here, because they said you couldn't put any limit on, you'll notice even upstairs, because if you buy a $50 thing and put it on, the cost to the business is more than the dollar you pay.
Right,
So often they have a
Yes.
set charge, a certain amount per transaction, and then a percentage charge over it.
Do you
I
know
see
the
that with
state,
political contributions made by credit cards and classic example.
do you know the states that do?
I know Massachusetts and Connecticut, because I was trying to focus on ones near us, but there are others, and I think I saw some information. When I was researching it, I want to say King County, which I think is the county of Seattle,
Yes.
does it, or but maybe it's the municipality or the city of Seattle,
Okay.
but there are some people of, some municipalities and states, sometimes it's associated with like refugees or immigration
Right.
population that just haven't got the banking done and they
Yeah.
have cash, but
Yeah.
they're just told they can't go.
Yeah.
I also had a constituent that worked at a ski area, and the ski area doesn't allow cash, and they said that it was, and they weren't specifically talking about the ski area, but they said from their experience that businesses do this as a way to increase spending.
That's right.
Research that shows like if a parent gives somebody, here's their child $15 for lunch,
Yeah.
they will have to stay within $15, but if
Right.
they give them a card,
Yeah.
they'll spend more money.
Like cruises. They're like, here's your little charge card.
Which is also as consumer protection people, we should be sticking to this because that, I mean, that, I'm sorry, that is the equation we often make with cards, is people don't pay attention to what they're spending.
Well, and
We
I
want people
remember
to
when
pay
with ski areas, we looked at pay cards where you had to accept your payment as a ski area staff person on a charge card. And that also is really problematic. They have big fees and things
Right,
like that.
and then if you don't see the fee with cash, it's a clear transaction.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was the idea behind the bill. And at first I was like, who are these people that don't have credit cards? But then when I looked into it, it's much more common than I thought. I was surprised to find that many other states.
My
started it.
father, yeah, he never.
Yeah, my father-in-law, he had credit cards, but he also just was somebody that carried a lot of cash.
Yeah,
And paid-
cash advance checks.
Yeah,
Yeah,
cash exchange.
I mean.
Can I just ask one question?
yeah.
Did you say it was a transfer station that didn't take cash?
Yeah.
So that's a municipal function?
No.
No, it's the
No,
seller.
not always.
Well, it's
We'll ask
just-
Rick.
But
We'll
if
ask Rick
if
if they
I've
count
got
as
an
a retail.
employee out in a fairly,
Remote location.
remote
yeah.
location.
Right.
I can see where to get an employee to take the risk in this day and age, to be out there alone with a fair amount of cash,
Or any cash.
or any
Right,
cash.
right.
I mean, that's why none of your subways go by cash, it's just
So
a
we'll
risk
have-
to the employee.
right.
If she hasn't asked to testify, we'll ask Erin Segrist, because I think she represents the convenience stores.
Yeah, they might bet,
Which are many of our redemptions.
And I was gonna ask to sell it, but
I would ask the
I think
seller.
we can, but let's also just Rick just couldn't come today to tell us like who's
He's
covered.
doing
and
his
who's not.
software, he's doing our workforce
Yay.
development bill upstairs.
So I have Casella written down though, so we'll cancel it if they're not covered, but we'll ask them to testify. Any other questions? It's pretty straightforward.
Pretty straightforward.
And it's for retail businesses, so it's
Right.
not
And I don't-
requiring
Well,
that's
now.
it.
Yeah,
It's
exactly. We'll
retail.
ask Rick. Yeah.
You have to, no, I guess anybody can go to the transfer.
This doesn't even say like restaurants don't have to do it.
Well,
Yeah, I don't know what retail, but it's a good
Yeah.
question. I don't remember talking with the drafter about that part,
Right.
but he did provide, like, here's all the exemptions that other states have done. If you wanted these, I just picked the one.
Yeah.
Make it-
No, that's
keep
good.
the bill on one page.
Great. I like it.
lots of, I love discounts for cash. If you pay in cash, you get a discount, which is appropriate, given that it costs more to use the card.
Right,
So
some
if you
businesses
pull into
really
the
want
gas
that.
station And you don't
Right.
know it's
Then
cash.
this guy might as
You
well.
see the fee, it's signed with a lower number.
So we
Pull in,
are
you see the little.
running behind.
This is cash.
We're gonna let Senator Pritchett go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know.
Pat, we're running 10-15 minutes behind. Do you?
We are.
Okay, yeah. Well, we haven't given Rob a chance to speak on the
Ah.
last issue. So Rob.
Yep. Thank you.
So we potentially will lose our break.
Can I just chat?
I was surprised to see it, Bruce.
I know, we're trying.
That was good.
Doing our best.
Do I plug in for my presentation here or?
Sure. There's a power strip here. Do you need a?
You need a plug.
Oh, you
Plug.
mean to
Yes.
to show?
I believe I sent you the Zoom.
Oh, you did,
Oh,
okay, oops. Should, I didn't read my email as well. Okay. I'll get on and it'll be on the Zoom. Sorry about that.
Yeah, and I'm used to covering transportation, I plugged right in, so I've never
Oh.
done that, so.
We gotta find out how they do.
Yeah. And I'll do. I just can't find your email now.
Okay, I'm gonna send it to me.
Wait a second.
Okay, there we go. Okay. Okay. On. Okay, and then I'll share my screen. Okay, do you want me to start before Senator Clarkson? starts?
Yeah, she's in the doorway.
Okay, so I can start, okay.
Yes.
Good, thank you, Madam Chair, thank you, members of the committee. My name is Rob Kidd with the Vermont chapter of the Sierra Club. I appreciate you taking up, S-271, the right to charge legislation. For those who are not aware of us, the Sierra Club are the nation's largest and oldest conservation-based group. We have, I think, 3+ million members and supporters around the country, and within Vermont, we have about 10,000 members and supporters. We've been working on vehicle electrification across the country for over a decade, and we've been promoting vehicle electrification as one of our solutions to climate change. In Vermont, I've been working mostly on transportation issues for about the last 6 years, so I've been mostly camped out in the transportation committees. So it's actually pleasant to be in this other committee to talk about this particular issue.
Well, we love having.
Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me today. But actually, I just want to just step back and talk a couple small little details. Well, actually, the pretty big details, because of all the work you've already done. We have the climate action plan, which in the climate action plan, it calls for 170,000 electric vehicles by 2030 to replace.
Right,
what
yeah.
are in.
Right.
And we're only about, if you include plug-in hybrids and battery electric vehicles, we're about 12,000. So we have a lot more work to get.
And this is our biggest greenhouse gas emission sector.
Right. And, yeah, well, it
Probably
was.
next.
Next,
Okay.
no, thermal is now, transportation has dropped down to about 39%.
Okay.
So thermal is highest. So housing is now higher than transportation.
Right, well, we think it could be changed based on like a lot more people working from home, doing
Right,
not as
yes.
much traveling, doing much more virtual technology. But this is part
Which
of,
saves us on
right,
transportation.
saves us on transportation.
That's
The cost are.
cost.
But really, on this point, I don't want to go into the science of climate change and all the other things you've done because you have a limited time, so I just want to stick to this right to charge.
Appreciate that.
So, but really, the biggest crux of this is most plug-in charging occurs at home, 80%.
Okay.
Some places I've seen it's up to 90%. My car, that's actually a picture of my car plugged in. It gets charged every night. My wife drives from here in Montpelier to Richmond. She's a school librarian and back every day. We plug it in, even though we can go 2 or 3 days without charging. We plug it in every night. My charger is actually installed on the side of the house, but a lot of people do have it in the garage. There is no requirement for within a garage, but some people like to have it within that case. But I wanted to kind of say the convenience factor. I never had to go to the gas station. And, like only whenever I have to travel long distance, my car, the range is during the summer, 270 miles. During the winter, 200 miles. So we never go to the gas station. And actually, for those who have kids, it's great because you don't have to stop at the gas station convenience store. So I love that part. I get begged to stop. But anyway, so I just want to kind of explain the difference in charging, why it's really important to give consumers the access. What Senator Vohowski was talking about, she's right now currently using level 1 charging where she's just plugging in like a regular outlet. It takes about an hour just to get 3 to 5 miles worth of range. It's not feasible for those who don't have access. So you really need to have the level 2 charger system. Now,
Is there level 3?
Yeah, I'll go with the level 3. Now, level 2 charger is what actually is my charger, what I showed you on there. But then also, this is a public one. It's actually at Hunger Mountain Co-op in that little picture. And they are actually drawing down from solar, and that one is a free charger. It's one of those rare free chargers. So it's in no place that you can charge for free. But in most cases, it's about 20 cents per kilowatt hour to pay for charging. Now, if you go actually upgrade to level 3 public charging, it's going to cost between 35 cents to 50 cents per kilowatt hour. Now, the convenience factor, that's more of a convenience factor because like you actually pull up and you're traveling, it takes 35 minutes, 45 minutes, depends on the state of your car. This one happens to be Senator Harrison's district in Brattleboro.
Right.
And I've used that one multiple times and, but sometimes you get there and it's being occupied, you have to wait. So we're not really fully the public system yet, but it costs more. That's closer to the cost of gasoline. So it's not really much of a price break, and then it's inconvenient for those homeowners.
What,
But
sorry, 35 to 50 cents.
per kilowatt hour,
Yeah, but that's not comparable to
it's about comparable
3.20
to-
now.
It's closer to the
Right.
cost of a gallon. I'm not sure the exact.
Kilowatt hour and a gallon are the same.
Yeah, we don't
Sure,
have
yeah.
a good, let's talk about that.
You're gonna
level.
put
Yeah,
your
I'm
basic
gonna put it into the
times.
current rates, so you can kind of see where it looks on my next chart. Because all the utilities, well, not all the utilities, Green Mountain Power and particularly Burlington Electric all offer special rates if you have their charger. And some of the other utilities, the smaller ones aren't able to, but they're getting to there. The PUC is in a docket of getting rates, EV and time of use rates. Washington Electric, just up the road, I know is looking for a time of use rate instead of a fully EV, but they need the special meters. Now, if you see in Green Mountain Power has 2 different rate plans. One you can get as low as 15 kilowatt cent per kilowatt hour. And then or another one as low as 0.14 kilowatt hour. And that's about equivalent of $1.15 per gallon. Now, if you go into Burlington Electric, the rate is 9 cents per kilowatt hour at a 70 cent per gallon. That's if you follow the stipulations. I think theirs is charging after 10 p.m. So
it's a time of use one.
yeah, the time to use, but they're a special EV rate. But you look at it, most people, they're gonna charge their car when they come home from work. Except renters, people in multifamily unit dwellings who don't have access. So that's why it's really critical to do that. Now, also what I referenced before is we have a goal of getting 170,000 electric vehicles switched over. If these people can't get to them and access it, we're never gonna reach our goal. So we need this extra mechanism to help people be able to charge it. I also flag is that Vermont joined the Advanced Clean Car 2 rules, based on the California rules, that is requiring us to transition to 100% electric vehicle sales by 2030. So by 2035, everybody's gonna have an electric vehicle. Well, everybody who has, I mean, there's still be
Yes.
all the turnover budget.
Right.
So we're gonna have to make sure
Yes.
that the landlords are providing charging facility, renters have access to people in multi-unit dwellings. So the one thing I love about this legislation is it's not requiring the landlords to pay for it yet. Or not requiring the utilities to pay for it, which you had a lot of discussions because that's some of the things that's actually happened in transportation committee is about the line access of how we have to upgrade the lines. And I know in the House Transportation there was a segment about that looking into that problem. And it's asking the PUC to look more into that detailed question about how we're gonna pay for the line upgrades. But it's something that we definitely need to do because not everybody can access it. Senator?
As we're looking at chargers that are available right now, for the homeowner to have something at his or her home, you're talking about level 2 is the max that's available right now. Level 3 is not, which would apply, let's say, in an urban area or someplace where someone can get back and forth. Now, when you take a level 2 charger and someone who drives a distance, as I do every day, I drive 138 miles round trip. And the number that you came out with level 2 was somewhere between 15 and 20 kilowatt per hour. And so that says you got roughly a 9-hour charge to do that. You average it at 15 cents a kilowatt hour. Now, when you have a power failure, if you have a power failure during the night, with those of us who rely on some of the smaller power providers often do, what do you do? Is there a backup? For example, they'll use a generator to charge.
Yeah, so that, that's what I have to get used to and learn how to manage that. Like myself, every time I'm gonna give you my example, is every time I like hear a storm coming, I make sure that car is fully charged up. I'm like, honey, you gotta plug in the car. It's gonna rain really hard tonight. It may shut off the power. And I know Green Mountain Power is talking about installing power walls so they won't have that opportunity, so you can actually store it up in reverse. Now, there's also the reverse side is the technology is starting to change where you can do vehicle to grid, so you can actually potentially use your car as a battery source in reverse. And I know that particularly the Ford F-150 is capable for that right now, but a lot of the cars are starting to transition to that. So it's going to be a little bit different. We're getting used to it. Not the same thing, but you get used to this pattern. Like it's second nature. When we wake up home, we plug in the car. That we know it's going to be bad. We know that we're going the distance. Even you said, I know you're not I can't remember what exact town you live in, but Swanton. But even like driving there, my car during the winter, I can drive all the way to St. Albans and back with no problem. Like I'll be on charge. There's some cars that may not, so you need to still invest in the public infrastructure, which the state of Vermont has been doing a lot of really good work, particularly the ACD.
Well, that again is one of the issues that concerns me too, is particularly during colder weather, in which the amount of distance that you could drive drops sometimes precipitously, and the claims of manufacturers. I've noticed, for example, Tesla's claims, and I've tested, on a number of occasions to see if they're claimed back. They haven't. They've been substantially less than what's been claimed, and others have reported the same kinds of problems.
We do have about 2 minutes, so I just want to make sure you get to your.
Yeah. So anyway, I wanted to show those particular rates
This
on
is
here
a rate primer,
to kind of see
Yeah.
why it's really important.
Right.
And then just actually also Burlington Electric and Green Mountain Power both offer incentives where they provide a free charger and they provide some of the money, but the customer has to pay for the installation. I was fortunate in my home, they already came installed. I was excited. I was like, "Ooh, that's one less thing I gotta do." But it could cost from $500 to $1,000, excluding those other challenges Senator Cummings you referenced
Right.
around the.
And you have to be a homeowner.
Right, so this is getting permission with the
Yeah,
landlords.
exactly.
And that's the problem, is I used to rent and I couldn't access
Yeah.
that, so I'm looking for helping other people.
Exactly.
So. But anyway, the question came up, other states
Oh,
having right to charge laws. You can see them, all the ones in green there, so they have some type of modifications. California and Colorado are the strongest, and then there's
Okay.
some others that made smaller into a little detail, but if you go to plugamerica.org, it has all those details about
Great.
what their policies are, if you wanted to dive into how you want to structure it a little bit differently. I'm just looking at this as an opportunity to get more EVs accessible to all income groups
Exactly.
and not adding extra burdens to people yet.
Right.
Maybe landlords and utilities later on, but
Yeah. They should see it coming too. It's gonna be standard.
right, while I actually just referenced utilities, I've spoken with Burlington Electric around this. They haven't dived into the specific legislation, but they're alerted now, they've taken it up.
Yes.
But they've been very great partners in expanding vehicle electrification. I've done a couple of events with them promoting electric vehicles.
Yeah.
And with their rates, they have some different grant programs. They've worked with the multi-unit dwelling program that you all created, the legislature a number of years ago. So
Yeah.
they're trying these things.
I added VED to the list because they have a high proportion of larger rental buildings that are over 5
Yep.
parking spots, so if they can
So-
even find parking.
So since your Let's Council already answered this kind of question, what is
Yeah.
right to charge? I'm not going into those details, but it's in my file, but I see it as just making it accessible for everybody.
Great.
And then here, actually, I grabbed this slide directly from Drive Electric Vermont, and actually, the reason why I grabbed that, because it shows you like how many homes and our multi-unit dwellings.
Yeah,
Kind of
that's a
seeing
great slide.
that chart, you can
Right.
see, like, yeah, most of Vermont homes are single family,
Right.
which we're getting that, but we're leaving out significant parts of the population, and then if you even look in Burlington,
Yeah,
you see 68% in multifamily homes,
Right.
83% of them are renters.
yeah,
So that's why.
68% in Burlington.
No?
Yeah.
In Burlington. And multifamily rentals in the rest of the state, 66%.
right.
So that's why we kind of need this policy to enact it to help those people access it. They're gonna be changing over to vehicle electrification.
Yeah.
We need this policy.
That is a great slide.
It's a great
We-
slide.
we need
So
that
we
slide.
have your presentation, I'm sure.
Yeah, and that's courtesy of Drive Electric Vermont.
Oh, great.
Dave Roberts is a great resource on anything on
Yeah.
electric vehicles.
Drive Electric is out of VEIC, right? Okay, so when we reach out to them, they do that.
They're a contracted entity,
Yeah.
program, so you all support that program and, but they're not lobbyists in policy, but if they come in and bite, they can talk to you more about
They
that.
could, yeah, they should be able to help us with.
So then actually I just threw in there a couple of key features I saw here
That's great.
about this, the tenants are allowed to install the EVSE, and this the tenants pay for the associated installment costs, pay for additional electricity use, tenants pay additional fee for parking if it gives them a reserved parking. And then in some cases, they also tenants purchase liability insurance.
Right,
And then,
as a foundation, and some landlords will wanna help,
Yeah.
you know?
and then also the features of condominiums, and there's been like, this one actually, I've known people who live in a condo association, particularly Murray Health and Condos Center Cummings. I had somebody who was trying to work with the condo association. They've been running into some challenges. So it's
Yeah, because a lot of those, you would have roadways and parking lots that would have to be dug up.
so, but basically, if people aren't being able to access this, and so it's not just renters, it's those who live in condos
Yeah,
and duplexes and other buildings like that, but we need to expand access to.
great.
So that's basically the short end of my
Perfect,
presentation. I kind
yeah.
of speeded it up a little bit because I know you're running
I
tight.
know, we also could have had you go before Damien, because it's great that you summarized the bill for us,
Yeah.
what's for, so that's really
So
helpful.
that's basically it. I'm available anytime anybody wants to email me for questions.
Thank you.
I'm actually gonna be out of town for the next 2 weeks, so
Okay,
anybody.
There's
I-
a mass migration out at the moment.
Yeah,
So it's that time of year, I
close to
guess.
Dixie, that yeah, people want to.
well, it's a combination. Family has time off, with kids in school, wife is a school librarian. And then your town meeting break, it works out perfectly, like, but I have to leave here.
Well, enjoy, and we're glad to have you in our committee and working on this. And you may have heard Senator Harrison, I'm hoping we'll
Yeah.
keep going with this. I've also reached out to Ben Walsh at VPERG just to say, if, help us shepherd language changes, they're hopeful with that. So I'd love to have you at
Yeah.
VPERG helping.
Yeah, so like I said, I'm available by email for any questions.
Yeah,
and call
But
me.
enjoy your vacation.
Oh, I'm going to.
All right, thanks.
Thank you all for your time.
Thanks. So.
Thank you.
We are likely to lose our break. It really just depends. I think we all kind of heard basic needs budget before, but
Nope.
so hopefully it won't be too new to folks. Well, I suppose maybe. But Senator Clarkson is up first as the lead officer, unless you just want to stay in your chair.
I want to stay in my chair.
Okay, and Pat, I think I just saw him walk through the door.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that was good.
That is. So I'm just gonna wait till he joins us, because he's been a key partner.
But we do have a fourth witness at 11 for firefighter cancer coverage, so
But I'm gonna.
we're not
do that one.
stealing that. Yeah. Pat, you can get right in the witness chair,
Oh,
because
all right. Because
Senator
I'm gonna
Clarkson
tee it
doesn't
up
wanna move.
right here. So, dear committee members. You
state your name for the record.
Allison Clarkson, Windsor County District. Hi.
Lead sponsor S246. You're always telling others that.
Oh, that's true. Well, except I've been here all morning. Okay, anyway. I am the lead sponsor of 246 because I had the honor of chairing the basic needs budget. And I don't even know what our title was. Were we a task force or a study advisory committee?
Technical advisory.
That's right. We were the basic needs budget technical advisory committee. And we were 8 strong. I'm just gonna let you know, just because it was a great breadth and depth of experience that was on this study, on this technology advisory committee. Me, Richie Westman is my other senator, Ellen Kaler, who's here in the room, Elizabeth Scharf, who I got to know, which was great. She works for Capstone. She deals with these issues all the time and uses the basic needs budget a great deal. Representative Ashley Bartley, from Franklin County, Elizabeth Burrows from Windsor County, and they both serve on general.
And this was a consensus or unanimous?
It was an absolutely unanimous report that you're about to hear.
Okay.
Aaron Larkin, who represented human resources in business, and Sean Sheehan, who works for AHS in the Department of Children and Families. So we had a lot of the players who used the basic needs budget and a lot of thoughtful people whose great brains were brought to bear on updating it. So as you will recall, we created this study, this technological, this methodological update committee. And the reason we did that is that JFO had asked us to do this because we have not updated the methodology for calculating the basic needs budget for 15 years. So this is our work of reviewing the entire process. Wendy, just to remind you, and actually to remind everybody, this is work that's done by JFO every 2 years at the beginning of a new biennium. This is work that is essential to our human services committees, our health and welfare, appropriations, finance, and our committees, commerce.
Right.
And
And it
economic
is
development.
used in negotiations with institutions around the
It's
state
used
to say.
in HR departments,
Yes.
all left, right, and center, and we thought we want to make it more useful and more up to date with a better methodology. So we met 5 times. It was a very productive group of people, and it was a terrific group.
Yay.
We have 6 recommendations, which don't need to be acted on statutorily, but we have 2 that have to be changed in the statutes, which is why we're here today.
Okay.
So Patrick will so,
We have this.
oh,
We have it. We just.
do we have it?
Yeah.
We must have it somewhere. And I will just remind us that the basic needs budget calculates the actual cost of living in our state. And it's based on typical expenses for a wide number of household configurations. And it helps us fully understand what it costs to live here in Vermont. And we have 6 recommendations. JFC reviewed them. JFC punted one of them, but adopted the rest. And then we have 2 statutory changes, which we bring forward in this bill. If we make these changes, we really feel that we will have a much more useful document. We would like to market the use of it better and hope that more people will trust it and use it. And to calculate the because it will hopefully be such an accurate tool in calculating and identifying what it costs to live in Vermont, and what people's employees need to earn to live in Vermont. And so we're going to need to market it better than we do at the moment. But big thanks to JFO, who did a great job. Pat, it was wonderful to work with Pat and get to know him better. And to Emily and Sorsha and Patrick, and to, of course, Ellen, who's our font of information because she is the creator of this in 1996.
Great.
So that is my tee up. And then I thought we would walk through the methodological changes. Pat can do that, and the 2 statutory changes that we have in here.
I think we should focus on the statutory changes today. And maybe you can email the methodological changes to everyone and people can ask questions at a later time, but we have about 20 minutes now for the rest of the discussion. So Pat. Thank you to this task.
Yeah, we did. It was great. We did good work for you.
Pat.
So I do want, so Patrick did enjoy fiscal office. I do want to touch on one change that was brought before JFC that was ultimately not acted on. So part of the committee's report recommended changes don't require statutory changes, but relate to the statutory change that was brought forward. And that was to add a configuration. So we have currently 6 configurations, for context. They range from single to a kid, 2
Okay.
kids.
Okay,
to
like budget
adults.
scenarios.
Yeah, different budget scenarios.
Yeah.
And currently the official livable wage, the number that you probably see advertised when you see a single number for it, is based on a 2-adult household without children.
Right,
The assumption that is used when calculating the budgets for that family configuration is that it's a married household, which has implications particularly for things like taxation and housing.
yes.
So the first non-statutory recommendation had to do with adding a configuration for a single person in shared housing. So 2 people living together as roommates, which of course, again, relates primarily back to the housing budget that we need to look at,
Mhm.
because they're not to be sharing that room. And also the different type of tax filing.
Okay,
And because the committee recognized that this report is quite the undertaking, in addition to adding that configuration, they proposed to remove a configuration for 2 adults with 2 children, where one of the adults is a wage earner and the other is not,
okay,
which of course has implications for childcare.
yeah,
The thought process being that with the new childcare subsidies, which are incorporated into the budget, which was another change that JFC adopted, that might be less relevant.
okay,
But so part of the JFC's thinking was, my interpretation anyway, was that because in the first instance, the shared housing configuration had the accompanying statutory request, that it was kind of duplicative for them to act on that particular piece of it. And
so
then,
they wanted to leave it to our deliberation.
yeah, and then the other piece of removing the other configuration, I think that the sense was they just have enough information to be, taking a data point out of the
Sure.
methodology that
Yeah.
would no longer be available.
Right,
So to get to why we're here,
yeah,
the bill language includes 2 methodological changes that do require statutory change because they are specified in statute to do them a certain way. The first one is to clarify that the official livable wage would refer to that single adult in shared housing. So currently the statute requires that it's a 2-adult household, but anyway, the advice we got was that particular change, even though we're still talking about a 2-adult household, should be clarified to indicate that we're not talking about the typical married household that we've been talking about in the past.
okay,
That's interesting.
Yeah, well, it's a shift in.
So it's shared, okay,
Single
so
person
shared,
shared housing.
but it doesn't have to be 2-person housing.
but it could be shared with 4 people.
Yeah.
But it's often shared with 1 person.
Right, and you're kind
The
of
point
roughly
is
paying the
that-
same.
You're not paying the whole.
Right.
Well, in this instance, we would still assume it's a 2-person household,
Right.
but rather than it being 2 married individuals, it would be.
Which has tax input, which has
Right.
additional financial.
So you're not just trying to figure out something 4 bedroom house with 4 adults.
Well, we
Like,
certainly, that's certainly
UVM
something
type
we
of
can get
situation.
data for, it's just, it wasn't the
Yeah.
the thrust of the recommendation.
So you're taking the average cost for a household and still dividing it by 2.
Basically, yeah.
Okay.
But not married.
Well, just
The stipulation
Because
is
it-
that,
That sounds about right for.
No,
for
that
mine.
sounds
Yeah,
reasonable.
yeah,
Absolutely.
well, and just housing is so expensive, as we all know, so people are sharing it more.
Right.
I'm just trying to understand, is this language substitutes for the existing language?
Correct.
The existing language is dealt for a 2-person household that lives in effect, it's a household, married couple or not. And you're replacing it with a full-time worker, a single person who lives in shared housing, and that could be 2 housing people who are cohabiting or 2 people who are entirely separate from one another, but simply live under the same roof, or 3 people under the same roof, or 4 people under the same roof. Is that, if I understand it?
so the assumption that would be used is a 2-bedroom, so it would specifically be 2 people who are not in any kind of relationship living together.
Mhm.
Just so like, I guess, think of your classic post-college two friends get an apartment together, type of situation.
But you're eliminating the notion of, in effect, a married couple.
No, that we have
So
another.
the
Or is there another, that's what I'm.
that
is there another
configuration would
category?
remain in the report. It's just the basis for the official livable wage would be for this shared housing situation. So
When you say the official livable wage, is there a livable wage for each category or group, or is there a single livable wage?
So there is a livable wage that we publish for each discrete family configuration, right? It's just there is one that is referred to as the official livable wage. And currently that refers to the 2-adult household, which until this bill, if it goes through, would have been a married or cohabitating couple.
And now it is two separate people, but who may live in very different configurations.
This is specifically speaking to roommates who are not in romantic relationship.
And in a 2-person household.
In a 2-person.
Still a
household.
2-person household. I see where Senator Brock is saying the language doesn't
Doesn't
make
say
that
2-person.
explicit,
Yeah.
but you're still doing it behind the scenes, I guess, like.
Do you want it to say two people?
Well,
Did
that's
you
what you need.
intentionally take away two people?
I think if there was any kind of technical change to how the family configuration is worded, that would be fine, but the way I've
Yeah,
described
if
it
you're
is.
describing it as two persons, that to me it adds clarity. In this case, there's a lack of clarity because it could mean a variety of different things. And just computationally, as I would compute it, I would expect that it would actually lower the livable wage. When you add these other configurations, because it clearly costs less for 4 people to live in the same space that 2 people live in.
That's certainly something, that would be a request for Damien.
I was gonna say, you're also not Lynch Council, so I was gonna ask
Yeah.
who,
Well, again, as I say,
Right.
But I'd be
I
happy
just want to point that out to me.
Yeah.
This is not.
for you as JFO purposes, you'd be treating it like 2 people.
Yeah.
But if we want the language to be clear, we will ask Damien for that. Make
But
sure
if you're
we have
treating it as 2
copies.
people, but you're computing it on the basis of 2, 3, or 4 people, the numbers would have to be different.
We'll be computing it on the basis of 2 people.
Yeah, so I think the language then is not
Sure,
clear.
okay.
So we can work on clarifying that, but why don't you,
Yeah, if we try to give Ellen some time, we have about 2 minutes.
Sure. There's just one other requested statutory change, and that has to do with currently in statute, it says that the official livable wage is an average of urban and rural budgets. So for each configuration, we do publish an urban and a rural budget. The committee's thinking was that these are 2 distinct regional types. And by averaging them, you're making a wage that's not quite correct for either region. So the proposed or recommendation is to publish 2 official livable wages, one being for an urban area and the other being for a rural area. And that requires statutory change because it does say in statute currently that those have to be.
And we might have Damien more about how that's defined, but that's
that,
not your call.
that is how it's defined.
That's
That
that's
is
how
an
it's defined
average
in
between
statute.
urban and rural.
But do we define urban and rural?
Yeah, we probably do.
You don't define what urban means in statute, and you don't define what rural means in statute, but that's something that would
Yeah,
fall more, that's something that can be handled through JS.
great, okay,
This was a source of budget debate, so we will discuss that further as we go through.
okay. Anything else from your?
I don't think so. So the 6 areas that were adopted by JFC will already be incorporated when we write this report this coming summer.
Okay, so our next report is coming out,
In the fall.
I'll be back
In time
here
for
next January to tell
Next
you about the
January.
report.
okay,
Just Madam Chair, just something I'm going to ask in the future when we have time
yeah,
is update every 6 years. It seems like it
Yes,
should
that's
be
the
more
other change.
frequently because,
Well-
but we can talk about that later. Just
That's our, yeah, the other
especially lately,
recommendation.
things have changed so much.
right,
So we do write the report every 2 years. What's in the language of the bill is an intent to have one of these technical advisory committees every 6 years.
Okay,
So in the interim, we do run any methodological changes that don't require statutory
Okay.
change through JFC, and they approve it. So it's not
okay,
stagnant until the next advisory.
okay.
So this is to respond to the fact that we hadn't done this work for 15 years.
Oh,
It had not been updated for 15 years,
six
so
is
now we're
better than
building,
15.
yeah.
we're building in a mechanism.
Yes,
We're building in a mechanism to review it every.
that's great.
Okay,
Good.
Yeah.
Are you good?
Stop stealing Ellen's time.
No,
I think I conveyed all the information.
I'm good.
I think I got everything out. You guys know.
We can also get a short break if you don't take all 10
Okay,
minutes, so you can be a hero if
I
you
will,
like.
I will do that. I'm happy to play that role for you.
Thank you.
Hello, Ellen Taylor, Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund. I served on the technical advisory committee for this wonderful committee that Chair Clarkson chaired, Senator chaired. And we worked, as she said, very hard. We went through all of the very specific elements of the methodology. Working with Patrick and Damien was fantastic. And we looked at, for instance, on the family configuration size, we actually asked Patrick to take a look at, well, what is the actual demographics of the state of Vermont? How are the households actually sugar out? Because we wanted to find the most representative households, make sure that really matched what it is that is existing in Vermont. The other thing I will just say is, the language is very intentional. It is a basic needs budget. This is still very conservative in terms of what it actually costs to live in
It's
Vermont.
not a livable wage.
And there is nothing in this report that requires businesses to pay these amounts. This is intended as a guidance document, right? It is used in negotiations, as you mentioned, and it is used as a reference document within state government, within, for instance, in the statute of Vermont training program. It requires from a criteria, a threshold perspective, in order to receive Vermont training funds.
Yeah.
You have to be able to show that you're paying at least a livable wage. So this is where Senator Brock, the language of the livable wage, because there are these 6 family configurations, the question is always kind of muddled, well, which of the 6? And then you have actually really 12 because you have urban and you have rural. So that's why in statute back in 20, I don't know, it was probably in 2000.
2008 was the last time.
Yeah, maybe it was 2008. The desire of the legislature was to say what is the livable wage, just as a point of reference, so that for clarity purposes, understanding that all of this is guidance only. Right, so that's what's important to remember here, is we're trying to signal to business owners, to state policymakers, to human resource professionals. Here's something you can have faith in as being a basic conservative perspective on what it costs to live in.
Right. I do think for Senator Harrison's benefit, and also, like, I remember doing this on House General 15 years ago, but
And
many-
ways and means, we
yeah.
dealt with it with minimum
so
wage.
many people don't remember what goes into it. So I think we should, when we revisit this to vote the bill out, it would be good to spend 15-20 minutes on, like, how do we get to this calculation? And maybe 30 minutes so we could talk about these methodological changes. Would that be,
That would be helpful also.
who would that be?
It's on our website right now.
That's not the same.
No, I know, you can get it in front of you, are the basic needs budget presentation from last
that would
January,
be-
which tells you all of that.
Right, and but we didn't have that in here.
We did.
Happy to do that with you.
We did?
Yeah,
We did something last
I'm
year.
happy
I was
to do
pregnant,
that.
so I don't remember, so.
Dan came in and shared the
Dan did
updated
Oh, he did?
numbers. I don't think.
Does
he gave
everyone
you
feel
that
okay
at all.
without
No,
that?
but we can walk through it quickly, next time, Pat.
Yeah,
It's
well,
easy.
especially with the methodological changes, that will help, I think, cause like, this was here's the language we wanna change, but let's paint the picture for half an hour.
Yeah,
before we vote
that'd be
it out.
helpful. I have a demographic
Sure.
question that might be easy to answer. So, the 2-person romantic relationship household. I'm hearing that that's representative of the
Yeah.
state.
It ended
So
up
how did
being,
you find that out?
it ended up being right about the same demographic percentages of folks, wasn't it?
No, I don't think so. So
Or
we-
I would like to see that
We
distribution
can,
at some
we
point.
can
even
discuss
just send it.
that when we take it up again. I think we can be prepared to chat about that.
So if we finish now, we can get Connor in the witness chair and still have a 5-minute break, which I need,
Fabulous.
regardless.
Do you want to give your 5 minutes between?
No, because I don't wanna cut the firefighter folks short.
Yeah.
So let's switch now.
Thank you very much.
And Connor, I'll share, thank you, you're new too, yeah, thank you, Ellen.
Okay. And I think I'm supposed to share, but I do have to keep your hand out too. Excuse me, sorry.
Do we have more time because we don't have floor?
Yes,
No,
not
that's
today, but tomorrow,
not
I
today.
thought today we don't have.
Thursday's at
Right,
1
but
though.
it's at once.
Oh, sorry.
You have more time next week for the.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
a little nice for.
I'm starting to write my name.
One more, yeah.
Yeah.
I got the
Calendar.
share.
They
And I think I'll share this. If I can do.
Okay, so we'll vote that in a little bit.
Yeah, that'd be great. Oh, shit. Oh, great.
Okay. So I'm sharing it behind me, or I will eventually, but really it's a two-sided thing, so it's not that useful as a slideshow, but thank you so much for having me. I'll try and be as brief as possible. And mostly it dovetails pretty well because I don't have a moving concern before, there's no big decision coming out of it at the end. So this is a nice relaxing hello, hopefully. For some of us. So I'm new. My name is Connor Timmons. I'm the executive director at HomeShare Vermont. As some of you may know, my predecessor Kirby Dunn had been there for 23 years. So
Yeah.
Kirby is traveling and enjoying a much well-deserved retirement, and he's agreed to meet with me once a month if I buy breakfast. It's really great. So it's really been a very nice transition, and I think that's one of the things that is worth updating and knowing that we've had a good transition. I'm sure
That's great.
that's not always the case, and so I've been really happy to be part of that. I also wanted to mention again, I don't have any pressing sort of moving bills or anything like that going on around this, but I did think it was useful to talk in the context that we're in. Later today, I think there'll be a reading of the Age Strong plan, which HomeShare Vermont is sort of tucked into, and really in terms of all the goals that they have in that Age Strong plan.
Yeah.
I think it comes mostly out of Dale, but is a
Right.
multi-stakeholder process.
And you've probably heard from Kirby, I think HomeShare Vermont is an underutilized gem of how we could solve crises for traveling nurses and,
Right.
you know.
So let's talk a little bit about it. Yeah, we've been around long enough that most of the time I speak with state legislators, everyone says, yeah, I know all about y'all. Or I was part of your startup, or there's been a lot of those great revelations. So I don't want to I don't want to go into a big minutia of it, but I do want to give you sort of brief cliff notes and then talk a little bit about why it's useful to look at it from multiple different levels, because I think HomeShare gets pigeonholed a little bit and it's worth talking about it from different lenses. So I'll go very quickly if I can. So we are a matching and screening process for Vermonters who have homes to share and for Vermonters who are looking for places to live, which right now we have a lot of both of those.
Right.
Right. And so most of the time people think of it in terms of the hosts. So the people who have homes to share. When you refer to hosts and guests are my picture. So most of the time we think of those folks as older Vermonters who could use some help shoveling, or it'd be great if they didn't have to drive at night, and your mind will go to all the different things that come up, grocery shopping, food, or even just like some maintenance around the house. Sometimes we think someone who just needs company. So those all are true. And there's also, and you'll see on our age range for hosts and guests is wildly diverse. We have folks in their 20s who are sharing their homes as hosts. We have folks in their 20s who are sharing homes as guests. We have folks in their 80s who are sharing homes as hosts and acting as guests. So this is not, we are one of the few organizations that I'm aware of that does home sharing that does not have an age cap. And I think we are looking to lead into that a little bit right now. So when we think of those folks that are hosting, the benefits in general are they're aging in place in a more comfortable way on their own terms with agency that they need. So they're making a lot of decisions around how they age in place. That includes making a decision who they're going to live with. It includes helping set the arrangement, the rules of the house and how that's going to work. And they do so in a way that is economically beneficial to them if their arrangement requires it. Versus another option where options are being kind of taken away. And expenses for assisted living, I don't even need to remind you all, are out of whack. And so for a lot of these folks who have planned effectively, who have made their plan, and things have just changed dramatically for them. Others are folks who have been working paycheck to paycheck, and this continues that struggle for them, and home sharing provides an opportunity for them to ease some cost burdens that they have. And you can see some information on the backside specifically about easing those cost burdens. And we just know they have better health comes from aging in place. So it's true of all of us. The other way to look at it is from the guest perspective. So someone who's seeking housing. I don't need to remind this group, there's a lot of people seeking housing right now, and there's very few of them finding. If we add the needing affordable housing, there's a whole other group that is not finding it right now. Our average rent for fiscal year 23 that guests paid was $378 a month. Now,
Comparable to mobile home park lot rent.
right, and these are not, and these are folks who are providing some service, generally at that rate, they're providing some service, our
Yeah.
max is $650 a month, which is, still compared to Burlington, is still about almost a third of what the HUD says that people should be paying for a single bedroom. So, I mean, the math there is pretty staggering, and what we're also seeing is a lot of folks who are, I don't wanna say on track, but maybe at risk for housing insecurity, are kind of getting scooped up by home share every once in a while. And we always say we're like we are really good at shaving off 1% of each social service organization we refer through.
Right.
We can't take their whole caseload off. But for the group of people that it fits for, that it's gonna work for them,
Yeah.
we're moving them out of that situation. And that's just worth noting, because we are trying to expand our network to shave that 1% here, 1% here, 1% here, and maybe more than 1%, I'm just being sort of facetious, but the other perspective to look at is towns and villages. So if we think about who in those towns and villages, and I for the last 12 years lived in Starksboro, Vermont, so I think it's a pretty good example. I think it's yeah, right. Ellen, that's true. We need to talk about that. So when I think about how Starksboro runs, it runs on our senior citizens, it runs on our elders, it runs on our Vermonters who are running the library, we're taking care of everything from snow removal to making sure the meeting house is happening, to managing polling stations, all those things. By allowing those folks to age in place with a little more agency and a little more oftentimes mobility, we're keeping the fabric of those communities intact. So that's another lens to think of it. The other thing that's going on is we're putting more people into those communities where those local businesses need people walking in the doors and buying the things they need to buy, so it moves the economy along in those small neighborhoods. And it also does a pretty good job maintaining housing more effectively. So we have aging population, we also have aging housing stock. And this creates at least the opportunity, it's not always the case, but it creates the opportunity that maybe these folks will have more ability to maintain their house because they have someone who's signed up as part of their deal to be the person who cleans the gutters or does this or does that, and we see that in all of our, in a lot of our rental agreements. Folks want their home to look the way they want it to look, and they want their neighbors to look at their home to reflect their abilities, and so, and then the others is just sort of, the general economy, looking at it from the 20,000 foot view. Senator Rom just mentioned visiting nurses or nurses that are moving into the area. We see that all the time. We get a lot of applications from guests who are out of state who have got a job and they've got 6 months to find a place and they're panicked, or 3 months or what have you. And so these are folks who are coming in single or just have graduated and are wanting to move back to Vermont or what have you. And they are needing a place to stay, and the housing market is such that after looking for a week, they're bumfuzzled. Yeah. Please.
And how are they finding?
How are they finding
Are
us?
the hospitals referring them to you?
We do, so it's sort of like tending a garden. It's all these little referral networks that we're constantly kind of sprucing up, because as there's rollover, we're constantly meeting with other case managers and making sure that folks know about us.
I have insisted that UVM Medical Center pay for a staff person for you, and I don't think they've done that yet.
I have an application in for, not necessarily for that, but for outreach to specific underserved communities through their grant process that they have going right now, so fingers crossed on that. I didn't shoot the moon with that grant proposal because it's UVM and it's big and costs and things like that are gonna.
But not just UVM, all our hospitals.
I agree, so we have an outreach specialist,
But not just for visiting nurses, it's not just for these travel nurses that are eating our short, but for full-time nurses.
And we're seeing that as well, so this is.
Doctors even.
Yes.
Senator Brock.
What about, how's turnover? What type of turnover do you see?
So how long are they?
Yeah,
That's a great
particularly in cases where someone is looking, has a job, hasn't found a place to live, winds up using home sharing, do those people stay or do they turn over once they find?
And it varies dramatically. I think one of the things that's interesting about our data that I will just sort of make a watch this space kind of comment, because this is not a point in time kind of count. We have it mentioned as 13 months as the average length. But
do you have that here?
Yeah, it's on the first slide. It's sort of tucked into the page at the bottom.
Oh, I see.
But I will say that is not the way I want to count it going forward. So next time I come in here, I'm gonna have a different number for you. Because right now we count them when they end.
When they
end. So we know exactly, this is how long that lasted.
Right.
Which is away. But what we're missing here is the 17-year matches the 13-year matches, the
Right.
12-year
Yeah.
matches.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which, so what I'd like to do is more of a point in time or maybe a balance sheet kind of look at it, a snapshot of currently, how long are the matches that we have in the current place? And I-
13 months isn't gonna sell it, period.
13 months includes the ones that, what we, you know, that have a moment where they start up and, oh, it's not working out, or someone had a girlfriend or something, you know, and there's that, people are smushy, things move along, you know? But one thing I do notice is that we are seeing a lot of return customers on the host side, which is
Great.
terrific.
Yeah.
Because, and that's one of the things that we are gonna be pushing in the next couple of years is start home sharing before you need it.
Yeah.
Because
Well,
we
that's
hear,
great.
we hear this all the time
Right,
where
but
people,
you're coming, stay in your home, you haven't forgotten, like, people who don't wanna leave their single family home.
Yeah,
Just
right.
need to start planning to have some
So
help.
have an extra.
well,
Well,
maybe, yeah, and that's not, you know,
Single
that's
family
not,
home
you're
are
right.
usually one bedroom.
Right, and that's not gonna work for everyone, it's not, you know, like I said, this isn't the solution that can blanket the whole state for every single person who's looking for home housing. But for those who it works for, it works on so many levels, like I
Yeah.
can't describe all the different multiplier effects of having this work.
Well, we can't overstate, you know, being happier and less lonely is so critical to our health outcomes.
Because
I mean,
Sherry, typically, I'm assuming a single person moves into the host home, but do you ever have families
Oh, all
move
the
in or couples and?
So, okay, a couple of thoughts on that. Yes, is the short answer. We have couples who have someone move in. So we have sort of someone who is a caretaker for someone who is either early onset dementia or what have you, and they just need an extra body there for XYZ. It doesn't take much to imagine what.
How about the other way around?
And it can work the other way around. Sometimes oftentimes a pair and pair. So there's a couple in Heinsberg that I believe is moving in with another couple in Heinsberg. They have an ADU type unit, so that makes that easier. But we're really excited because the ADU is not going to
Short-term
it's Airbnb.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's going
Yeah.
to affordable housing, to a family that is committed to supporting that. And they are in this great example of people who don't need it yet. They're fine. They go skiing, they they fly up and see their kids every once in a while, they got grandkids on the way, they're living a very vital lifestyle, one of them's working, I think. But they know, they're looking at it and saying, in 5, 10, 15 years, this is gonna be helpful, so let's get in the practice right now. They're not assuming that these two will be with them for 15 years, but they're kind of getting themselves in the practice. And that's exactly what I'm talking about, do it before you need it.
But we have 2 minutes
Yes, I'm
left.
gonna go real quick.
We gave you some money last year.
Yes.
And we
Yeah.
want to expand.
So let me
it.
talk to you a little bit about
Yeah.
that. So we are expanding right now. We have gone through an expansion phase. And of course, in the middle of it, I came on. So maybe the expansion is moving at the pace that it needs to move right now. One of the things we've done is we've hired a case manager for Central Vermont, a second one. So now we have 2 case managers in Central Vermont, which allows us to stretch from Lamoille all the way to Orange in a much more meaningful, impactful way. And we're seeing impact from that already. The other thing that allows us to do.
Are you seeing impact from the flood situation?
Yes and no. It's hard to necessarily track. What we've been hearing from our partners over at like Capstone is they're looking for family housing.
Right.
Those groups have really been impacted, but we are seeing some flood impacts. I haven't seen what I would call a spike, but I would say Central Vermont has gotten busier.
Okay.
We're also carrying more, our biggest match numbers that we've had last year, we ended with 71, which was a new high, and last quarter we were at 81. So we're aiming for 100. And that's
81 matches
matches,
statewide?
matches, yeah. And so we're aiming
Not
for,
matches statewide.
that's for our service area.
Oh, that's for your service.
That's our service area. It's
Okay.
223 people.
New
224
matches,
people.
new matches and.
56 new matches, 71 carried at the end of the year.
Okay, got it.
Sorry, so the total number of home shares at the moment in Vermont are.
Individuals or matches?
Well, there's the other home share. group.
Oh, number of persons is 224.
Number of persons is 224, that's correct. So
But the total matches is what.
But it's going up and that's a small
Right,
amount
we're-
of money for
as
large.
of last quarter,
number of houses.
we were at 81 active matches.
Does that mean 81 household units that are,
81 sort of pairs or.
and that's
Senator Rock was
statewide?
referring to, that is for our service area.
Right, I'll let you do concluding thoughts.
Yes, I'll do some concluding thoughts. One of the things, so we've expanded slowly. The other thing
We're doing concluding
It's fair.
thoughts.
One thing I just wanted to make sure that folks understand is what makes home sharing work is the model that we use. We have case managers that come in and do interviews on the way in. We do 6 background checks. We do 4 reference checks. And then we also have a matching process where there's a community sort of case managers that get involved in the mix. That allows us to make a good match, have an intentional match, have less blow ups, but most importantly, have a point of reference if it's not going well, or if we need to tweak the arrangement. We set up the arrangement, we are the third party that sets that up, and then we're the person that gets, that we check in with every 3 weeks or a month or 3 months as things go along. And so if there is an issue, we are there to hold hand and make sure that that's working well, or move someone along to a different match if they need to. And that is critical. I think it's an essential piece of what we do, and it's very different than setting up a Craigslist for home sharing
Yes.
or something like that. And so it's why we need to work slowly. It's why we need to move with intention, but it's also sort of our secret sauce. So anyway. Thank you
So
very
we
much for
do,
making
thank
time.
you, we do, you know, we do invite you to come back every year
Sure.
and every so often to make a budget request, because this is a very affordable way,
Yeah.
not just to create a new unit of housing for somebody, but to help a senior
Sure.
or somebody who needs it fend off loneliness, age
Right.
in place, keep their.
The one thing I'll just mention, I know I'm
Yeah.
sort of done, but I didn't mention it, but we have partnered with the Thompson Center, so we are now
I
in Windsor
was gonna
County.
say,
Yeah, I had said.
You're not just in these.
Right, and so
areas.
this is
Lovely.
fiscal year 23, so fiscal year
Okay.
24's report will
We'll
be
shade
coming out
in that
July.
county.
Yeah, so the chunk of Windsor County is now, and Shari is starting to see matches,
That's
and so we're really excited to see that, so.
Thank you for your work, welcome.
Thank you for making
to
time for me
share.
and.
We will go off live and try to be back at 11. So
What?
3